Okay, folks, let's give my second attempt at YouTube videos a try. I'm going to post probably 3 videos to cover the content from the rest of the disorders chapter. So I'll start. This video will be about psychopathy, and I've already introduced the notion of personality disorders last week. And then in the next day or two, I'll post 2 videos on therapy, and then a final couple of videos on social psychology. So it might be helpful for you to be referencing, as I am right now, your PowerPoint notes as you listen to these videos. My son, who's an 18-year-old computer guy, said, "Dad, for God's sake, record the YouTube video on landscape, not up and down." He said that's a bit bitter for the audience. Anyway, hi. I still don't have any news, by the way, about final exams, but it's looking pretty sure. As soon as I get official word from the college, I'll let you know. So anyway, we were talking about personality disorders last time, and I introduced this notion that they're kind of like almost like extreme personality traits. And personality disorders, unlike major depressive disorder and different types of anxiety disorders, tend to be pretty chronic, tend to be pretty stable, right? Because they're personality based. So the disorder I want to talk about in this video is antisocial personality disorder, or psychopathy, okay? So I introduced the topic, I think, to you last week. I talked a bit in general terms about what psychopathy is. We talked a bit about Robert Hare, who is one of the world-leading experts in psychopathy, and who created, I'm looking at slide number 21 right now, who created the psychopathy checklist, which is an interview protocol for clinical psychologists to use when they're interviewing people who they suspect may have antisocial personality disorder, APD, or psychopathy. So I'm looking at the slide that lists a few different qualities of the psychopath, and of course it's got an image from Hollywood, or at least what Hollywood's conception of a psychopath might look like. It's from Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter. So what are some of the qualities? I'm just going to grab Bob Hare's book right now and hold it up for you. This is a book he wrote a few years ago now, and it's intended for the average person, non-academics. And Bob Hare wanted to describe, based on his clinical experience, what makes a psychopath. It's called Without Conscience, the disturbing world of the psychopaths amongst us. And he wrote a subsequent book with a guy called Paul Babiak called Snakes in Suits. And it's about, as you might suspect, psychopathy in corporations. So I'm going to read a few excerpts from this book. So some of the qualities of the psychopath. Glibness, superficial charm. So somebody who's glib is, they're kind of Trump-like, you know? They're able to, they're usually really smooth socially, quick with a joke. Superficial means on the surface. So superficially charming, you know, you chat with them and you probably like them. So here's an excerpt from his book, and I'll just read it to you in terms of what would illustrate this superficial charm. Bob Hare is talking about one of his raters who administers the psychopathy checklist. One of my raters described an interview she did with a prisoner. She writes, "I sat down, took out my clipboard, and the first thing this guy told me was what beautiful eyes I had. He managed to work quite a few compliments on my appearance into the interview. Couldn't get over my hair. Imagine you can't get over mine either. So by the time I wrapped things up, I was feeling unusually, well, pretty. I'm a wary person, especially on the job, and can usually spot a phony. When I got back outside, I couldn't believe I'd fallen for a line like that." Grandiose sense of self-worth. What does that mean? they think they're pretty important and more important than other people. Grandiose means they have an inflated sense of their own self-worth. Pathological lying, I think you can probably figure out what that's about. If you've ever known somebody who just couldn't resist lying, that's a chronic pattern for the psychopath. And if you remember, it goes back to childhood. And in childhood, if you're diagnosed as a chronic rule breaker, you'll probably receive a diagnosis of conduct disorder. And when psychopaths are caught in a lie, it's like they don't care. There's no shame or embarrassment. They don't care. Conning manipulative. This is, I think, a fun example. One of our subjects told of strolling along a dock. This is a person diagnosed with psychopathy, strolling along a dock where boats were moored, and he spied a young couple looking at a large sailboat with a for sale sign on it. He walked over to the couple, smoothly introduced himself as the boat's owner, a complete load of baloney, he later told us, and invited them aboard to look around. After an enjoyable hour on the boat, the couple made an offer to buy. Once the terms had been negotiated, he agreed to meet the couple at the bank the next day and asked for a $1,500 deposit to seal the deal. After a friendly parting, he cashed their deposit check and never saw them again. I remember scams in Vancouver when, and I guess they still are, rental rates were quite low. And so people would, a number of people would show up at a location. The scammer would claim that that was their apartment, and he would ask for a deposit check, cash all the deposit checks he got, and he would never be seen again. Lack of remorse, guilt. This one's a bit grim. I was once dumbfounded by the logic of an inmate who described his murder victim, this is Bob Hare writing, as having benefited from the crime by learning a hard lesson about life. The guy only had himself to blame, another inmate said of the man he'd murdered in an argument about paying a bar tab. Anybody could have seen I was in a rotten mood that night. Why did he want to go and bother me for? Anyway, the guy never suffered. Knife wounds to an artery are the easiest way to go. Lovely. Lack of empathy. This is one of those hallmark characteristics of psychopath. There's like an inability to really see the world from another person's perspective. This is a very gruesome case of a subject talking about, in this case, a female psychopath allowing her boyfriend to sexually molest her 5-year-old daughter because he wore me out. I wasn't ready for more sex that night. The woman found it difficult to understand why the authorities took her child into care. She belongs to me. Her welfare is my business. She didn't protest very much anyway. Failure to accept responsibility. I think that's fairly self-evident that the psychopath doesn't feel the need to accept responsibility. I want to just talk a little bit about some of the qualities, some of the characteristics of psychopathy. Usually come from a lower socioeconomic status, but isn't that true for a lot of disorders? Oftentimes we find socioeconomic status or poverty associated with different disorders. And again, as with many disorders, it appears to be related to both biology, and some of the risk factors are low birth rate and poverty and family instability. Some evidence to suggest that there's smaller and decreased function in the frontal lobes of the brain. There's some evidence that psychopaths are more likely to have a smaller amygdala. We don't know why. The amygdala is involved in the management course, is chronic. Usually it drops off after the age of 40. Recidivism. I think I mentioned this in class the other day. And I think I misquoted. I think I said the recidivism rate is about 2 to 3 times. It's actually 3 to 4. So what that means is in a criminal population in jail, prisoners diagnosed with psychopathy are 3 to 4 times more likely to reoffend than prisoners in jail who don't profile as a psychopath. So think about the implications of that in terms of who gets released. Schoenborn, who was found guilty of murdering his 3 kids about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, is up for potential release, unsupervised release into the community. I don't know whether he'd profile as a psychopath or not. He actually has been in a psychiatric institution, and he was, I believe, found guilty due to a psychotic disorder. Bob Hare tried in the prison population to do therapy, group therapy with psychopaths. And his goal, you remember one of the challenges they have is being able to empathize, understand other people. So what he tried to do was teach psychopaths empathy. And so as with all prison programs, there was an evaluation, a program evaluation done. This was tracked. The success of the program was tracked, and I believe Hare reporting that it didn't work. And in fact, if it enabled psychopaths to be even more effective in lying and being and conning people, because they had an extra tool in their tool belt. They could feign or fake empathy. Fascinating disorder. There's been a lot of research done in psychopathy in corporations as well, and these folks are called sometimes subclinical psychopaths. They don't quite meet the diagnostic criteria for psychopathy, but they demonstrate a lot of these personality characteristics. And you can imagine somebody in a corporation who lies, who's manipulative, who lacks remorse or guilt and lacks empathy. You think about some of the carnage, some of the damage they could do in terms of their interpersonal relationships. They're often liked by their bosses because they know how to ingratiate themselves, and they often leave a trail of devastation in terms of the relationships they have with peers and subordinates, because they just can't be trusted. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up at that stage with psychopathy, and hope you enjoyed that piece. I'll record either tonight or tomorrow the first portion of the treatment video. Bye-bye.